This week on BSD Now, we look at two-faced Oracle, cover a FAMP installation, look how Netflix does the work of the complex stuff behind the scenes, and also show you who the patron of yak shaving is in this week's episode of BSD Now. BSD Now, episode 222, How Netflix Works, recorded on the 29th of November 2017. Hi, I'm your host, Benedikt Reuschling.
And I'm Alan Jude.
And as always, we have a great episode prepared for you. But before we go into our headlines this week, we want to give a little shout out to our sister podcast here on Jupiter Broadcasting, TechSnap, which had Dan Langill's last episode this week. So we want to thank him for being the show host there and giving us the information that we need, his insights, his tips. It's been an interesting journey, let's say.
Yes, maybe after he gets a little bit of his free time back, we will have to get him on here for another interview.
Oh yeah, that would be good. And yeah, let's hope that his successor will also be as successful as he has been. And but, you know what you're talking about. You've been on TechSnap for how long? How many years?
300 episodes I did.
Okay. Then that's certainly an accomplishment. Yeah. So thank you, Dan. And let's get into our headlines this week, which is a little bit less optimistic, but still. The title is, Why is Oracle so two-faced over open source?
Yes, so, Oracle loves open source, except for when the database giants hates open source, which, according to its recent lobbying of the U.S. federal government, seems to be most of the time. So, Oracle has recently joined the Cloud Native Computing Foundation to up its support for the open source Kubernetes, and yes, it's a long-supported contributor to Linux, and yes, Oracle has even gone so far as to finally open up Java development by pushing it out into its own foundation. But this same seemingly open Oracle has actively hammered the U.S. government to consider that there is no math that can justify open source from a cost perspective, as the cost of support plus the opportunity cost of foregoing features, function, automation, and security overwhelm any presumed cost savings. I would argue that Oracle code has probably twice as many bugs as open source code, but anyway. So the Register replies that punch to the face was delivered in a letter to Christopher Liddell, the former Microsoft CFO and now director of the Trump's America Technology Council, and it was sent by Oracle's senior vice president. They say the U.S. government had courted input on its IT modernization program. Others writing back include AT&T, Cisco, and VMware. In other words, based on this letter, what Oracle wants us to believe is that open source leads to greater costs, poorer security, and limply featured software. Now, is Oracle content to leave it there? Also arguing that open source is exactly how the private sector does not function, seemingly forgetting that most of the leading infrastructure, big data, and mobile software companies today are open source.
Very much so, yeah.
But yes, it's just details. Rather than taking this counterproductive detour into self-serving silliness, Oracle would do better to follow Microsoft's path. Microsoft's too used to, Janus face its way through open source, simultaneously supporting and bashing it, until under Chief Executive Satya Nadella's reign over Microsoft, they realized it's okay to fully embrace open source, and its financial results have loved the commitment. Oracle has much to learn and emulate in Microsoft's approach. It's like if Oracle's database software is so good and doesn't need help with features and so on, why is the open source fork I wouldn't say that MariaDB is an open source fork of MySQL that's not open source, but anyway, quite a bit.
Yeah, it's also not started at Oracle. It's not that Oracle developed their own open source project from scratch and gave it out there.
Right. Well, I think in this case, they're actually talking about Oracle DB, which is their proprietary product. But anyway. So the now change. Sorry, the text here doesn't read like English.
Yeah,
Oracle has never been particularly warm and fuzzy about open source. Its founder, Larry Ellison, might put it, Oracle is a profit-seeking corporation, not a peace-loving charity.
Well, that's in general, this is fine, but if you can approach open source in a totally different way than just, at one point raging about it and then the other finding it interesting or other adjectives.
Many companies leverage open source to save money and not have to pay for software and so on. And we're definitely getting more and more towards the trends where proprietary software is kind of going away. Not entirely, but is definitely diminished compared to what it was in, say, the 90s. And I understand how Oracle feels threatened in that way. But at the same time, they're perfectly happy to leverage open source as a way to make more money. Then it's two sides of the same kind of argument.
When it suits their needs, yeah.
To the extent that Oracle embraces open source, therefore it does so for financial reward, just like every other corporation. Few, however, are as blunt as Oracle about the fact that corporate open source life, as Larry Ellison told Financial Times back in 2006, if an open source product gets good enough, we'll simply take it. So the great thing about open source is nobody owns it. A company like Oracle is free to take it for nothing, include it in our products, and charge for support. And that's what we'll do. And yes, we've seen exactly that. It says, so it's not disruptive at all. We have to find places to add value. Once open source gets good enough, competing with it would be insane. We don't have to fight open source. We have to exploit open source. Exploit sounds about right.
Yeah. Well, you don't buy the actual open source product. You buy the, trademarks and all that aside, you buy the people or the developers. And you saw what happened with ZFS when they bought Sun. They were just staying a couple of weeks with an Oracle and then left the company, and that pretty much...
Well, as we saw during the update from Oracle at OpenZFS Dev Summit, is that there was a smaller group of people that continued working on it, and Oracle ZFS has a bunch of features or different versions of similar features than are in the open source and so on.
That are just Oracle internal or in the Oracle commercial.
Mm-hmm. And like they said, a lot of time the value add is support. It's very hard to do support for open source stuff because you need a certain scale to be able to have enough people to be able to, answer support questions 24/7 and have a deep enough bench to solve all the different possible problems, while at the same time, you need to have all that when you start, right? Because you can't get customers if you can't provide them with that level of support in exchange with the support contract, but you can't have that many people on staff to do it until you have enough customers paying you to afford it. And so it's kind of this catch-22, and Oracle is big enough that they can manage that.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, yeah.
Yeah, so while Oracle doesn't crack the top 10 corporate contributors to the Linux kernel, it does register as number 12, which helps it influence the platform enough to feel comfortable building its infrastructure as a service offering on Linux with Zen for virtualization. Oracle has also managed to continue growing MySQL's clout in the industry while improving it as a product and a business. As for Kubernetes, Oracle's decision to join the Cloud Native Compute Foundation also came with profit and loss strings attached. The CNCF technologies such as Kubernetes, Prometheus, gRPC, and OpenTracing are critical parts of both our own and our customers' development toolchains. So one could argue that Oracle has figured out the exploitation angle reasonably well. This, however, refers to the right kind of exploitation, the kind that even free software activists can love, or at least tolerate. But when it comes to government lobbying, Oracle likes to look a lot more like Mr. Hyde than Dr. Jekyll. There's lies, damn lies, and then there's Oracle lobbying. This is the current administration's decision to follow The Obama administration's support for IT modernization is commendable. Most recently, the White House asked for feedback on how best to continue improving government IT. Oracle's response is high comedy in many respects. As TechDirt summarizes, Oracle's latest crusade is against open source technology being used by the federal government and against the government hiring people out of Silicon Valley to help create more modern systems. Instead, Oracle would apparently prefer the government just give Oracle lots and lots of money. Understandable from Oracle's part, I suppose.
That's a customer that's very high paying, or has a high amount of money,
As such, Oracle's request for even more isn't too surprising. What is surprising is the brazenness of its position. The sheer contempt found in Oracle's submission to IT modernization is pretty stunning. Why? Because Oracle contradicts much that it has publicly stated in other forums about open source and innovation. More than this, Oracle contradicts much of what we know is essential to competitive differentiating in the increasingly software and data-driven world. Take, for example, Oracle contention that significant IT development expertise is not central to successful modernization efforts. What? In our software is eating the world existence, Oracle clearly believes that CIOs are buyers, not doers. The most important skill set of CIOs today is to critically compete and evaluate commercial alternatives to capture the benefits of innovation and conduct at scale, and then to manage the implementation of those technologies. So Oracle would prefer everybody just buy technology instead of create it.
If you have the money for that, yeah. But that's not a strategy that's working in the long term. You can't buy
and
it.
I love this heading on the Register article. It's the vendor formerly known as Satan.
Okay, that's a statement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing is, Oracle doesn't need to do this, and for its own good, shouldn't do this. After all, we already know how this plays out. We need only look at what happened to Microsoft. Remember when Microsoft wanted us to get the facts about Linux and open source? Now it's a big-time contributor, even to FreeBSD. Remember when it told us open source was anti-American and a cancer? Now it's aggressively contributing to a huge variety of open source projects, including the donation to the OpenBSD Foundation. Of course, Microsoft loves open source for the same reasons any corporation does. It drives revenues as developers look to build applications filled with open source components on Azure, and there's nothing wrong with that. Would Microsoft prefer government IT purchase Microsoft SQL Server instead of open source Postgres? Sure, but look at a single line of the response to the executive order that signals open source is bad, and you won't find it. Why? Because Microsoft understands that open source is a friend, not a foe, and has learned how to monetize it. Microsoft, in short, is no longer conflicted about open source. It can compete at the product level while embracing open source at the project level, which helps fuel its overall products and business strategy. Anyway, if you want to read more about the ridiculousness that is Oracle's attempts to quash open source in the government, the link is in the show notes.
I'm sure that Brian Kendrill and others would have something to say about that. But it's certainly not a nice situation.
Yeah, I'm not sure that anybody's really a big fan of Oracle.
Yeah, some people cannot avoid it because they have the big database needs. But, you don't just buy from a vendor, you buy the whole thing. The image, the support, the support contracts and all that. It's all playing into and many people are looking for alternatives for Oracle nowadays, and way back when already.
Yep.
It's okay. So we suggest you read the full article for all the details and then make up your own mind. Our next story is install FAMP on FreeBSD. So if people are still wondering what that acronym stands for, it's an old acronym actually, but more people know it from the acronym LAMP, which is Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP. And if you just exchange Linux for FreeBSD, then you get FAMP, of course. And this is the classical web stack of the 90s, late 90s, that people started off with their web projects and had everything under control, from the database to the web server to the programming language, and also to the web server itself and the operating system. So this one is basically a nice how-to, how to install the whole thing on the FreeBSD and make it work.
Yes, and it's nice and modern as well.
Yeah, it has the latest software versions. It has as far as I can see, it uses package and other FreeBSD niceties that many people still don't know about, which is sad, but it's their loss, not ours. And so this is an article that basically gets you started with the base installation, and that tells you how to get it started. So this is part of the prerequisites, seeing an article in another blog post, how to install that. And then you basically have sudo installed, hopefully, and set it up. And then it walks you through Apache, PHP 5 or 7. And then you can choose either MySQL or MariaDB. This is up to you. And how hopefully that you are also comfortable with using an editor, either VI or Nano or whatever you have. There's plenty in the ports collection for you to choose from. And then basically you update your ports collection with portsnap fetch, or even better, portsnap auto, which fetches and updates in the same command, so you don't need to pick either one of those. And then you just basically start package search for Apache to see what kind of Apache modules are there, and Apache web server versions as well. And we choose Apache 2.4 here and install it quickly enough using package install Apache 2.4, and that will run through the package installation, and dependencies are also resolved. And this is what package does in all the applications that you can install on FreeBSD, and it's super nice, super easy, super cool. And then you add that to your rc.conf file. Sysrc is mentioned. Excellent. So you run sysrc apache 24_enable equals yes, and that will put it in your rc.conf so that the web server starts once your system is rebooted. And you also start the service, of course, and that will give you a very, very basic standard installation web server. So if you point your web browser to that IP address of your server, then you already get your It Works website, which is nice for a first web project. Then it tells you how to find your server's public IP address, because we need that in the next steps. And for people who are running this like on a web host or something that's already facing the internet, then it's good to know what your IP address is. Then the installation of MySQL is concerned, so they walk you through that. And it's MySQL 5.7 in this case, so you also do package install.
Or you could use MariaDB.
Yeah, both work. It's just a matter of choice of what feature set you need. I personally would prefer Postgres, but yeah, let's leave that out.
It depends on the application you're going to be running. You know, most PHP scripts don't support Postgres.
Right. Yeah, and then the whole installation would be called FAP, because the M and a P. Anyway, we use MySQL here, and we use sysrc again to make that start at boot time as well. So this is also starting the service, of course, service MySQL-server start. And then you, very important, start MySQL_secure_ installation, because that will set it up in a secure way and remove some dangerous defaults that are in there, and that will make sure that you don't get hacked that easily. So you set a proper root password for your database and some other settings that are helpful. And once you set that up, you are continuing with installing PHP 5 or PHP 7. It also depends on what kind of web project you're running. Maybe some blog software needs the newer PHP, or something else is requiring PHP 5 because they aren't on PHP 7 yet. If you do the package search for PHP 7, you can see a lot of modules and shared extensions for PHP that you can install in addition to the standard ones. But what we also need is...
There's one called PHP 5 or PHP 7-extensions, which includes a default set of extensions. The common ones like the session handling and the file opening, a bunch of the basic stuff. And it's basically just a meta package that installs all the kind of common ones. So if you just install PHP 5-extensions, it'll pull in most of the ones you would expect as a standard set.
Yeah. And then it's required that you need a installation or a package that makes the integration between MySQL and PHP work. So this is the PHP 7-MySQL-I, because that will make the database.
Basically the PHP driver for the MySQL, so it can speak the protocol.
Yep. Yeah, so that it can speak to each other.
And then you need mod PHP, which is the module that loads into Apache so that it's built in.
Yeah, these are the glue basically between web server and scripting language, as well as the scripting language and the database. And then you copy the standard PHP ini-production, which is provided by the port, which has sensible default for a production web server. And then you use that to copy that file to php.ini. So this is then your standard file. And with that, you can already start something production ready as your PHP settings concerned. Typically, I would change in this file the time zone. This is not done here, but maybe they're using the standard time zone, which might suit them in there where they are, depending. But normally, I would set this to, in my case, Europe/Berlin. So that you get the proper time.
All time zones on all servers should be UTC.
Or UTC,
but
yeah.
UTC.
But does the production...
UTC.
Right. But does the production PHP ini provide that already?
No, it's like you specified a time and didn't specify a time zone, which is ambiguous. It issues a warning.
Yeah, okay, then it does that. That's why it's not listed here, probably. Last but not least, you install a couple of PHP modules. This is optional. Again, it depends on what kind of PHP web application you're running. Maybe some block software or whatever application you want to run needs a certain extension to work properly. And they normally list that in your README files or the requirements for that specific software. And that's pretty much the rest you need to do. You can install, it walks you through an example how to install PHP 5.6 calendar, because a calendar extension might be helpful. And then you start creating a little test PHP file to see whether it works. And then after restarting your Apache server to load these modules, you can start testing your PHP processing by just creating a small PHP info file, which will dump you some output of your server configuration to your website so that you can see which modules were enabled and what is still missing and things like that. Then you point your browser to that, and sure enough, if everything works, then you should see an info page with all the information about your PHP installation. And of course, you shouldn't let this lie around on your web server, because everyone on the internet could stumble upon that and see how your server is configured. So then you should delete this after you saw that it's working. And then you can basically...
just point it at the directory where you've set up your various PHP web applications, and you can now serve them. Mm-hmm. Be that, WordPress or whatever else you're trying to run off your web server.
Yeah. So it's straightforward, and with all the FreeBSD goodness that a FreeBSD server provides. And yeah, this is a nice walkthrough, straightforward, and people should be able to follow that and get something working relatively quickly.
Yep. This week's episode of BSD Now is brought to you by IX Systems. Head over to ixsystems.com/BSDnow and check out their ultimate guide to buying a new server for open source. I don't know if I remember if I mentioned it last week, but we just bought another storage shelf from IX because we were running critically low on free space on one of our servers.
Oh, backup purposes?
Nope, this one's for the live production side.
Oh, that's more critical.
Yes, we were running out of space for customer data. And so we're like, all right, we're going to need, another one of those shelves and the controller card and the cable and everything. And they got that shipped out to us super quick, which was very helpful for us because it was getting quite critical. We just had one particular weekend where the amount of recording we had of live streams was about what an average month was in a single weekend. Ate up quite a few extra terabytes than we were expecting. And so we got the extra space, and on Monday of this week, we got that installed in our data center and all hooked up. But a comment in the FreeNAS social IRC channel gave me this interesting idea. One of the things you don't realize when you get stuff from IX is how much extra care goes into it than what you get other places. So, we get the giant 100-pound 4U storage shelf, and we didn't buy it completely full of drives. We just bought a smaller set of drives, and then we'll add more drives over time. And so it comes, and a bunch of the drive bays are empty. They're basically missing the carrier even. And then separately, in a different box, you get a box that looks like this. You get the hard drives, and they've actually got the drive already in the carrier and then wrapped up in the anti-static bag and then slotted in these slots. I don't know if you can see how you get 2 layers of foam about this thick on the bottom, then your hard drive in these rigid foam things that'll keep it from getting knocked around too much, and then 2 more layers of foam on top. And that is what makes sure that, the delivery kind, even if he kicks the box a little bit, or whatever happens,
that your hard drives are still...
Your hard drives are going to be okay. IX put a bunch of effort into testing all these hard drives for you and making sure that they've survived the bathtub curve of the first couple days, and they're going to be good. And so they don't want them to get damaged in shipment. So they make sure that they pack them extra nice. And the fact that they've already put them in the carrier means I don't have to sit there and put in,
screw.
144 of these tiny little screws while I'm trying to install this storage shelf. They've already done it. And
that saves some time.
Yeah,
definitely.
The drives are also already numbered on the carriers. So they take the effort of putting all the little carrier stickers on for you, and they're all nice and straight. And then we just load them into the server in the right order and plug in the SAS cable, and it's, look, a dozen more drives. And then suddenly
appeared.
We got 50 some odd terabytes of free space instead of not.
Yeah, especially if storage space is low, then you would rely on every minute without...
Yes, it's the great thing about ZFS was we just plug in the cable and the new drives show up. One command, zpool add an extra RAID Z and blammo or RAID Z2, and there's more space, and we start using it immediately.
Yeah, that's what you get from IX systems without any extra charge. And
exactly. We got a quote very quickly because we had just bought one of these for the backup server, so we knew exactly. It's like, we want another one of those that we just got. And we're like, okay. And it got tested and shipped to us very quickly. Great care was taken with making sure the drives were going to arrive intact, and they were reducing the amount of work we would have to do once we got it. It was use the machine to put the server in the rack, slide the drives into the slots, connect the power and the SAS cable, turn it on, and it was ready to go. And we had more storage. It couldn't have been any easier. That white glove treatment from IX, right from pre-sales through the sales, and then supporting it even after, when one of the previous servers we had blew a drive, they're like, okay, here it is, cross-shipped, and the problem solved very quickly.
Yeah, this is excellent. Yep. So,
also, I just saw a video on YouTube the other day. Someone got one of their TrueNAS, the commercial version of FreeNAS, and was putting it through a torture test of the failover system. So they got 2 of them set up for failover and are purposely trying to break them, which is quite an interesting YouTube video if you want to see just what it takes to try to break a TrueNAS.
Okay. Did it work somehow, or did it survive?
It survives,
Of course. Yeah, I should watch that just to see how the ZFS file system is yet another resilient example of how
Yeah, well, this is
these
taking it
systems.
slightly further. You have the shelf of disks, and then you have two separate computers, and you can kill one of them, and the pool will fail over to the other one, and everything just keeps working.
Very cool. Yeah, so tell IX Systems that, or actually what your problem is that you want to solve with your server, and they will tell you exactly which components will make that work. And sometimes which components you previously selected don't work that well, and suggest you other components that work exactly to spec.
Yeah, they actually know about ZFS and open source and so on, and we'll be like, well, you want to use this disk controller because it has the best performance and drivers, and oh, you were going to put SSDs in it for ZFS, but if you want to do read cache, you want this type of SSD, and a write cache, you want that kind of SSD, and so on. So just explain the problem, and they'll help you come up with a solution rather than just a server.
Yep.
So, moving on. How Netflix works. What happens every time you click play?
Yeah, so many people don't realize that Netflix is not just a video streaming company with an interesting array of, episodes and series you can watch, but there's also a lot of technical stuff happening behind the scenes to make it all work in the performance in the same area of the world where you might be as people watch more and more shows over the years. And so there's a lot of stuff happening in-house that make it work so that if you hit play in their Netflix, you get the same experience everywhere, wherever you are. So not long ago, actually, House of Cards came back from the 5th season, finally ending a long wait for binge watchers across the world who are interested in an American politician's ruthless ascendance to presidency. Yeah, and, well, if only that. For them, kicking off a marathon is as simple as reaching out for your device or remote, opening the Netflix app, and hitting play. Simple, very fast, and instantly gratifying. Yeah, for binge watching over the weekend or over the Christmas holidays, maybe. So what isn't as simple is what goes into running Netflix, the whole thing in the background, the servers, the streams for around 250 million hours of video per day to around 98 million paying subscribers in 190 countries. So this is a big undertaking. Because at this scale, providing the quality entertainment to make this work in a matter of seconds to every user is no joke. And as much as it means building top-notch infrastructure at a scale, no other internet service has done that before. It also means that a lot of participants in the experience have to be negotiated with and kept satisfied, from the production companies to supplying the content, to internet providers, dealing with network traffic that Netflix brings upon them. It's a lot of things that combine.
Yes, there are certain things about Netflix that they would really like to change, but they can't because the studios or the production companies say, if we're going to build this show, we need these guarantees that people aren't going to be able to watch it without the DRM or something. Whereas, in general, Netflix would probably be fine with removing DRM if that was an option for them. So they say, let's try to understand how Netflix is structured on a technological side with a simple example. Netflix literally ushered in a revolution about 10 years ago by rewriting the applications that run the entire service to fit into a microservice architecture, which means that each application or microservices code and resources are its very own. It will not share with any of the other applications by its nature. And when two applications do need to talk to each other, they use an application programming interface, or API, a tightly coupled set of rules that both programs can follow. Developers can make many changes, big or small, to each application as long as they ensure that it plays well with the API so that the other application can still work with the first one. And since the other program knows the API properly, no change or break in the exchange of information between the two services. Netflix estimates that it uses around 700 different microservices to control each of the many parts of its Netflix service. One microservice stores what all shows that you've ever watched. One deducts the monthly fee from your credit card. One provides your device with the correct video files that it can play. Whereas another takes a look at your watching history and uses algorithms to guess a list of movies that you might like. and one will provide the names and images of those movies to be shown on the main menu. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. Netflix engineers can make changes to any part of the application and can introduce new changes rapidly while ensuring that nothing else in the entire service will break down because of it. I remember when they were experimenting with showing different preview images for different shows to figure out, based on your viewing history and information they have about you, deciding which of the poster images for a particular show were going to make you more likely to click on it. Mm-hmm. Obviously, they wouldn't want that to break playback or something, right?
Yeah, that would be bad.
I say they made a courageous decision to get rid of maintaining their own servers and move all of that stuff to the cloud, i.e. run everything on the servers of someone else who dealt with maintaining the hardware, while Netflix engineers wrote hundreds of programs and deployed it on servers rapidly. That someone else that they chose is Amazon for AWS. Although not entirely. We'll get to the OpenConnect stuff later, which is the FreeBSD machines that they actually do, well, not so much maintain because they let them fail in place because it was easier. But
yeah, it's part of the Netflix story, not just Amazon alone.
So Netflix works on thousands of devices, and each of them play a different format of video and sound. Another set of AWS servers take the original film file and convert it into hundreds of files, each meant to play the entire show or film on a particular type of device and a particular screen size or video quality. One file will work exclusively on the iPad, while a different file for HD Android phones, and a different one for Sony TVs that can play 4K video and Dolby sound. And yet another one for Windows computers playing it with Silverlight or whatever. Even more of these files can be made with varying video qualities, the different bit rates, so they can easier load on poorer network connections. This is a process known as transcoding. A special piece of code is added to these files to lock them, right? They're all encrypted with DRM, and that's to prevent people from just stealing the files.
Copying it to their friend's computer and watching it there.
Yes, well, especially when they started deploying Netflix to more countries, they got to the point where they were worried about people stealing the physical machine to get the videos.
Oh, yeah. The whole server.
Because I've actually seen a Netflix cache box sitting in its shipping container on the floor of a data center waiting to be installed. It's like, well, I bet they ship it empty, but it's like, I wonder if someone could walk off with that.
Yeah, it's tempting. Yeah.
The Netflix app or website determine what particular device you are using to watch and fetch that exact file for that show meant to play specifically on that particular device, and the quality of video based on how fast your internet is at the moment, and you can actually see that switch sometimes. I think that was my biggest complaint about Amazon Video, was that it would start off at the lower quality and take a while to switch up. Whereas Netflix was much more responsive and figured out that, yes, I have a very fast internet connection, and I like my HD.
Yeah, once you start with HD, you don't want to go lower than that.
Yeah. So I say here, instead of relying on AWS servers, they installed their very own servers around the world. But it has only one purpose, to store the content smartly and deliver it to users. This is the part where FreeBSD comes in. Netflix strikes deals with internet service providers and provides them with a red box you saw in the image here at no cost. So many ISPs, including the one I had when I wasn't my own ISP, have these Netflix boxes. See if I can find the picture here quick.
That's the Frankfurt data center here on the picture. At least parts of it.
There it is. Red Netflix server. Okay. So if an ISP is big enough and has the customers, then you can just ask Netflix and they'll send you this box full of videos. And the advantage to being an ISP here is that you will, when customers of your ISP want to watch videos off Netflix, they'll get copies from the cache on these red Netflix boxes at your data center. And it won't use up your internet connection as ISP going out to the world to get a copy from some Netflix box further away. There are two advantages to this. A, it uses less of your bandwidth and it's faster for your customers, but it also means that the highest HD qualities can be offered to your customers.
Which they like.
Yeah. These Netflix OpenConnect boxes download the Netflix library from their main regional server to the server in the data center or in the ISP. If there are multiple of them, each will rather store content that is more popular with Netflix regions in that region and prioritize speeds. So the way they work is sometimes if something's very popular, like say the new season of one of their binge watching shows, they'll actually store each episode multiple times or on multiple of the boxes so they can spread the load out. And then the medium popular stuff, there'll be one copy on one of the servers or whatever, so they store more stuff. And then the very least popular stuff you might have to go further away to get, depending on how many Netflix boxes are close to you. So a rarely watched film might take time to load, whereas a Stranger Things episode is already, multiple copies of it are already sitting on a bunch of servers just to hop away from your machine. Now, when you do connect to Netflix, the closest OpenConnect box to you will deliver the content you need. Thus, videos load faster than if the Netflix app tried to load them from the main servers out on the internet. In a nutshell, this is what happens when you hit the play button. Hundreds of microservices or tiny independent programs work together to make one large Netflix service. Content legally acquired or licensed is converted into a size that will fit your screen with the right kind of audio for your device, and then are protected with DRM. The servers across the world have copies of it that they make from their closest server, and they'll be ready for you. And then when you connect, you will start pulling that down and playing it on your machine.
Yep.
So
simple thing for the end user.
Gripped by the latest episode of whatever you want, or comedy, or whatever it is. And your lifespan decreases as your binge watching turns you into a couch potato.
That's just a side effect of that. But certainly Netflix has an interesting way of approaching this, and they're also relatively open, more open than other companies of how they do this. They also publish articles on different strategies, like their Server Monkey stuff or their Rack Monkey
not Rack
craziness.
Monkey, Chaos Monkey. They have a whole
Chaos
series
Monkey,
of programs for different types of monkeys, where one of the things they do for testing in this is actually one of the microservices goes around trying to break the other microservices, and then they work around it and deal with it.
Yeah. I read an article on the journal the other day, so this is certainly interesting, and it's nice that it's a very engineering-driven effort and it's not just a movie-producing company or movie streaming company. So there's a lot of engineering going on.
Yep. Anyway, there's lots more detail in the article, especially about some of the other bits you might not have known about, and
pictures.
Lots
and all
of pictures,
that.
Yes. I would say this map is not to scale because I don't think their origin server's in India, but
yeah, it's somewhere else close by, but yeah, it's unreasonable.
I think it's in one of the Amazon data centers actually.
So it's time for our news roundup this week. Today, the first item is moving Freshports from over at Dan Langel's blog. So he's maintained Freshports since forever, and it's my go-to website for all things ports in FreeBSD. And so he has a blog post in there starting with, today I moved the Freshports website from one server to another, and my goal is for nobody to notice. That's ambitious. So in preparation for this move, he did first The DNS TTL was reduced to 60 seconds so that the updates are going a little bit quicker. Second,
yes. When you do that, you do need to remember that you need to reduce the TTL to 60 seconds at least X seconds before you want to do the move, where X is the old TTL, plus some wiggle room.
Yeah, otherwise you will get interesting results. Then you post it on Twitter, and the blog post is linked, of course. And then third, updated the status page because people want to know about things happening, and the website may be offline so that people know if something happens to it. And fourth, he put the website in the offline mode. So there's a little banner explaining what's happening and that it's not a crash or something, but this is basically a planned downtime. So he said for approximately 3 hours, but that was quicker than that. And he continued then with, just doing wget and checking that out, whether that service is still reachable, and it gets a 503 back as a result. So the service is unavailable. He mentions that these commands were issued on his local laptop, not on the server itself. This was on EST, not UTC, and that's why those timestamps may be a little bit off or unexpected. So he writes, it took a while to get the website to respond with 503, but now that I have that, I hope to make it a press a button feature. Okay, well, why not? And then he's basically ready to start the actual transfer. So he also has a what is missed section here. That's basically the stuff that he forgot or things that didn't go so well.
Yeah, he says he turned off command processing on the new server so that it wouldn't process the emails. But he forgot to do it on the old server, where he shows the command to use, I think it was daemon tools there, to stop all the Freshports services. It says, that stops processing of incoming commits. No data is lost. It just keeps queuing up in a database and then will be processed later. Commit processing could continue during the database dumping, but that does not affect the dump, which is consistent regardless.
Mm-hmm. And then the offline code. So there's he has links to some basic stuff, basically describing what this is all about. You can find that on GitHub. He used to put the website into offline mode. The main points are, first, there's a header change, so that displays the 503 service unavailable. And the second is the error document 404 if someone would run the index PHP. And then he moved the document root to a new directory in his web server containing only the index PHP, and every error invokes the index PHP, which in turn returns the 503 code. So everything that's been called up from the website will go to the same 503. Then the actual dump, so the database needs to move from one server to the next, and that was started. He gives a timestamp and also the PGdump command for that. So this is pretty straightforward. PGdump providing the server IP for the host, and then piping that into a dump that he can later use into the new server. He writes that should take about 30 minutes. He has set a timer to remind himself because, you tend to forget long-running jobs, and then days after that you're like, oh, I have this job running.
Yes, or the worst ones are things like that when you have to compile something, and it's like, all right, well, that's going to take a little bit, so I'll go look at this other thing. And then you end up doing that for like 2 hours, and like, oh, that one was finished after 20 minutes and has been sitting there waiting for me. It's a great way not to get very much work done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so he mentions the total time. This is right within the expected time frame. Mm-hmm. And he also provides an MD5 sum. Never use MD5s, that's what I would say, for hashing, because there might be collisions. But yeah, another SHA algorithm might work as well. Mm-hmm. So then he used rsync to copy that over. He writes the rsync should take about 10 to 20 minutes. He has already done an rsync of yesterday's dump file so that it doesn't put out the whole server over there. And the rsync today should copy over only the deltas, so the differences are just a couple of megabytes, I guess, depending on how big it is. And the rsync in total took 2 minutes and roughly 9 seconds, and a bunch of smaller ones, microseconds. And the MD5 matches, which is always good. You need to know that the copy operation was actually correct and moved all the files over, every little bit. And then the restore. So the restore should take about 30 minutes because it took, 30 minutes to export. It should take 30 minutes roughly to import. So he ran this test in a different machine yesterday or before the actual move. So he did that before. And then it's basically another create DB on Postgres using template 0 as the basic template and using, SQL underscore ASCII. That's interesting. You're not using UTF. That's interesting. Because I figured that would be, it's probably something in the web page code. That's going to go, so it's a new database now in his Postgres called Freshports.testing. And then he timed his PG restore with 16 CPUs running in parallel to import that Freshport dump from the old server. And that was done after, 25 minutes and 21 seconds real time. And, the next headline is insert break here. About here, he writes, I took a 30-minute break to run an errand. It was worth it. Then he changed the DNS by just, letting the new server be the new server taking over the functionality of the old server. And he writes, and nearly immediately traffic started. How many misses? During this process, such and such requests were declined. He grabs for those, 503, and there's a number, but it doesn't tell in the blog.
Yeah.
That's his little secret.
What's interesting, I think the only difference, the way I would have done it was I would have changed the DNS sooner and had the 503 thing going on the new server as well. In order to make sure the DNS switchover happened faster. And then flip the site live there. Although I admit that would make it slightly more difficult to do testing on the new site or whatever. Although I think for creating the 503, I would have done it just in the web server rather than using a PHP script like that. Oh, and Dan says that XXX there is actually, he meant to go back and get the actual number and put it in and just never did.
Okay, so this is not kept for a secret, so this is just a placeholder.
Yeah.
Okay, so total elapsed time, 1 hour, 48 minutes. That's quite nice, so roughly 2 hours to switch over. And of course, a lot of preparation work was done before that, so the new server had to be, set up and secured properly before the actual transfer could take place. So this is nice, and I like Dan's approach of putting everything out on the web and documenting everything mostly for himself, but the process is there and people can follow it and then see similar results as he gets.
Yes, like Dan, if you look here, Dan's got interesting stories about building his Dell R710 FreeBSD tape library machine and other things he's played with over the years. Lots of interesting stuff. And it's documented there, not just for Dan's own use. He does write it there so that when he needs to know how to do something that he's done before, he can go back and look at it. But he makes it available to everyone because it's super helpful. I know I learned a lot from Dan's old FreeBSD diary page where he's been doing this for years.
Yeah, who's been helpful. Growing up with that basically in our BSD history. Yeah, it's a great resource for people who want to get something done on FreeBSD, and he also doesn't. He not only writes his successes, but also something that didn't work and approaches he took, and then something came up with an error message he couldn't understand right away, and then the ways to figure that out is also documented. So this is a nice way of showing that everyone struggles sometimes and not only gets successes back. Yeah, so thank you, Dan, for this great blog post about the server move. And now everyone can enjoy, of course, the new Freshports website, which should be a little bit beefier and providing a little bit better results for our people needing to know about that certain port. They just have a browser available. They point it to Freshports and enter that port there, and then you get your information from the ports directory or from your ports tree. Okay, our next story is using Beehive on top of Ceph. So we've mentioned Ceph before, and Beehive, of course, a lot more than that. But this is a story over at the FreeBSD mailing lists, at the FreeBSD virtualization mailing list to be exact. This is from Willem Jan Withagen. Should I read that one?
Who I think is the person that was working on the port, but maybe not. But yes, so we covered Ceph a little bit before in the quarterly status report, but it's basically a distributed file system. And it's being ported to FreeBSD so that you can host it on FreeBSD, which means you can have a Ceph kind of distributed file system that's built on top of ZFS as a stable storage. And in this example, they're going to use the remote block device feature to be able to create a block device on top of Ceph, so it's distributed, and then lives on ZFS on multiple machines, such that they can have a VM whose hard drive is backed by multiple file servers, so that if one of those file servers goes down, the VM can stay up and the drive is perfectly accessible.
Excellent. This is the type of redundancy you want to have in case something goes down. You still can access the virtual machine.
So they run the rbd command and create a pool, or create a new remote block device on the pool rbd_data, and they copy into it the contents of the memstick.image, and that's the official image from FreeBSD, and they splat it onto this disk. And then they use rdb gate, which uses the geom_gate module in FreeBSD to basically make this work. And so now there'll be a dev gate1 device that will use RBD to have this block device that's backed by multiple file servers. So then they load Beehive's kernel module, the null modem module, the tap interface, the bridge, and some other stuff, set it up, create a bridge, add their main interface and their tap interface, and create the tap interface. And then they launch a Beehive using the null modem device as the serial console with 2 gigs of RAM and a hard drive that is this RBD. And then when they boot it up, they'll now have a FreeBSD 11 guest running, and its hard drive will be backed by multiple ZFS servers via Ceph. And then they can use the Q command to connect to the serial console. And you can see when they tried to copy some data, get this right, but it was getting 140 megabytes a second.
Oh, that's not bad.
Yeah.
No, need to recreate this. And with these instructions, it's quite easy to do, actually.
Yeah, so they built their cluster out of 5 jails running the OSDs, which is the storage server thing for Ceph. But yes, it'll be very interesting to see this as it comes along, and you could make beehives running that could survive the loss of one of the ZFS servers that back the disks.
Yeah, moving between servers, and the users don't have to know about this in the background.
Right, but also just, even if the VMs are all running on just 1 or 2 machines or whatever, but their disks are stored across multiple ZFS servers, so that if any one of those ZFS servers goes away, all the data stays fine. It's like creating a RAID Z1 across multiple separate pools, basically, on different machines.
Yeah, this is an interesting setup, and keeps things running if something goes down.
But I guess the important thing is that this shows that the port to FreeBSD of Ceph has reached the point where you can actually use it to back a VM now. And it's a bit past the experimental phase now. Yeah,
it's not some thing that's working only in the lab or somewhere on a developer machine, but this is something almost production ready. People should try it out and see if they get similar results.
Yes. This week's episode of BSD Now is also brought to you by DigitalOcean. If you were, say, wanting to build one of these Ceph clusters and you wanted to use a bunch of separate machines, but you don't have 7 separate machines at your house, you could easily spin up a bunch of droplets on the hourly pricing plan and pay only, even for this $15 one where you have nice 3 gigs of RAM in a machine, is only 2.1 cents per hour.
And each one would be placed in a different data center?
Or most likely you would actually want to put them all in the same data center and then use the private networking between them so you're not even using up your bandwidth and have a nice low latency connection.
Excellent. Yeah, that's even better. That's a little optimization there. That's quite significant.
And at 2 cents an hour, even if it takes you all day to play with this and build it, you're going to be doing, fine on the price of it.
Yeah, certainly. And DigitalOcean makes that super easy to run and set up. So you basically pick your droplet size and what kind of memory and disk it should have. Then you define where it should run in the data center near you. And then the droplet appears and you can start using it right away. It boots. You can access it using SSH keys, of course. And then you can run your favorite applications on it or use one of the pre-installed applications you can pick from the DigitalOcean website, whether it's a certain application for a blog or if you need some way of running a certain NoSQL database like MongoDB. This is all available pre-configured, and you can just make your local changes in your VM without having to figure out how the actual installation works.
Yeah, and so if you use the $15 instance there, and you do 7 of them all day, so 8 hours, it'll cost you like $1.20.
Yep, very, very nice and easy and super cheap, actually, because that's what gets you into trying out these things and without the fuss of figuring out the networking first and all kind of other.
Well, and also sure, you can create a VM. If for testing, you can create a VM on your own machine. It works fine. But when you need 7 VMs and you want each one to have 3 gigs of RAM, you probably don't have that much RAM in your machine that you're creating these virtual machines on.
Yeah, that's unlikely, yeah.
Yeah,
so
for $1, it's a pretty nice solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, remember to
I'd buy that for $1.
Certainly, yeah. Remember when you sign up, use the coupon code FreeBSD Now, which will give you a little credit on our...
Yes, a $10 credit. So when you add your own money into it as well, you can use this $15 instance for the whole month or do hourly or whatever you need. They also have their high CPU and high memory droplet sizes, depending on what your needs are. And then they have the separate block storage. So, if you're like, well, 20 gigs of SSD is probably not enough for what I want to do, you can rent space separately per gigabyte, and then you can actually easily move that between machines even that way.
Mm-hmm. And if you have a bunch of friends who you want to share this droplet with them, you can create a team because they have a collaboration solution that way.
We really like the team feature for work because I need, other sysadmins that work for us to have access to create and destroy droplets, but I don't want them to have access to the billing. And we can do that. Or in the case of the billing, I also need my business partner to have access to it for when I'm not in the country and it's time to pay the bill and so on. But at the same time, we really don't like sharing passwords.
Yeah, because you don't need to.
Exactly. So the team account really shows that DigitalOcean is, business ready and production ready. It's not just for personal playing around. This works great as a development environment and production. Mm-hmm. So head over there, check it out. It's good stuff.
Yeah, certainly. Okay, our next story is Donald Knuth, the patron saint of yak shaves.
Yes, so this patron saint of yak shaves. So this is based on a 2015 talk from the author of this website here, but he says it's worth repeating. So how to achieve the ultimate yak shave. The ultimate yak shave is a combination of the improbable circumstances, the privilege to be able to shave to your heart's will, and the will to follow things through to the end. So here's the way that this was achieved with text. The recount is purely the author's, inaccurate, and obviously just for fun. I'll avoid the most boring facts that everyone always tells, such as why Knuth checks have their own Wikipedia page. So the number of people that have gotten a check from Donald Knuth has resulted in there being a Wikipedia page about it. So it says depreciate. So Tex was invented to typeset a book. Not plural, a book. It was invented to typeset the second edition of his book, The Art of Computer Programming. The second edition had to be typeset again, as hot type typesetting, which was used for the first edition, was not available anymore. Being unimpressed with all of the available software options, Knuth decided to write his own system, which ended up later being Tex. But The Art of Computer Programming is an impressive book in its own right. It is still unfinished and currently spans 3.5 volumes. Yes, the fourth is unfinished, but the first chapters have been released, and you can see it over here. So this is, we're not even to the beginning yet. We're at Yakshave -2. Write the book of the century. Digging deeper into the art of computer programming, it already shows that works of a Yakshaver destined for greater things. All programs in this book refer to a common assembly language called Mix, which was also invented specifically for this book. So Yakshave -1, invent your own computer for illustration purposes. Regular assembly is too complicated. We'll invent our own conceptual computer and an assembly language to program in it.
Yeah, as one does, usually.
So implementation. The first version of Tex was implemented using the Sail programming language. It was later replaced by Web. What's Web? It's a programming language invented by, you've guessed it by now, Donald Knuth. It basically transpiles into Pascal. So it's a language, it has a compiler, and that compiler produces Pascal, which you can then compile with a regular Pascal compiler. So, Knuth transpiled the web before it was cool. Because, as you might know now, a lot of JavaScript is written by writing something else and then transpiling it down into JavaScript. So, Yakshave -1, somewhere down the road, implement your own programming language. And it says, web is a special language. In web, any bare text is just text. It's interleaved with marked pieces of code, which are later used for the program code. The documentation can be run through a special program to produce a text file.
Text file. It's a text file.
So in order to write, so text is written in a programming language called web. And the web programming language has a mode where the source code, the web source code, can write a text file. Did you get that?
Wait.
So the language that text is written in, the language itself can be compiled into a text file.
Ah, right. It's like a Quine.
Something like that.
Yeah.
The concept is called iterative programming, and it was introduced by Donald Knuth. So Yakshave -2, invent your own programming paradigm for the programming language of which you invented. But what does text do? Mainly, it does text layout and a couple of other things. Knuth was known for research on algorithms, couldn't do without coming up with his own algorithm, later published together with Michael Plass. What does this algorithm do? It finds a visually pleasing way to lay out a paragraph on a page without making line breaks look jarring. For example, by adjusting the glue, the white space between words. And there's a nice whole external explanation for this. But it's still considered good and has a huge factor on the recognizable look of text documents. So Yakshave -3, invent your own layout algorithm for the programming language, for the tool, for the book. Which brings us to the next problem. What does the laying out? Generally speaking, objects and clusters of objects of varying size. Interesting. That's what text deals with. It has no concept of a character other than its dimensions. Nevertheless, there are usually characters, and characters are provided by fonts. Fonts must usually be licensed for a fee, and free fonts weren't available back in the 70s. So another very recognizable feature of text documents is that they are often set in a font called Computer Modern. I'm trying to make this whole thing a bit more thrilling, so I'll let you guess who created that one. Yakshave number 4 designed your own font. And fonts need to be authored. Usually, they are described in some vector description, often Bezier curves. This is fairly standard and not an innovation of Knuth. But he wrote a description language for that, along with an interpreter to turn that description into proper font files. This is metafont. It's not strictly part of text. It's just that this yak happens to stand very close. So Yakshave number 5, write your own authoring tool for making fonts so that you can make your own font so that your text tool that you wrote in your own programming language can display nicely.
This is the rabbit hole, yeah. Very deep inside already.
Yeah. So as a side note, Metafont later evolved into Metapost, a generic vector drawing tool, and so on. And another side note, Tex and Metafont still have releases at a slow pace. Tex is currently on version 3.14159265, and Metafont is at 2.7182818. So yes, Tex is slowly converging towards Pi, while Metafont is converging towards E. So take that, you semantic versioning advocates. So Yakshave number 6, come up with your own versioning scheme, and Yakshave number 7, avoid adoption of it for greater good. Yeah. And we're not done yet. So you can lay out text and other things, but where do you convert it to? Now, everyone knows the horror that printers evoke, but no one wants to deal with those directly. Classic text instead converted things to DVI, the device-independent format. I don't know many details about it, except for that on the wiki page, it feels the need to specifically point out that DVI is not a document encryption format. It is, again, a stack-based language in contrast to PostScript, not Turing complete, which can be interpreted through a driver, which would then send that to whatever target, like a printer or a PDF file or whatever. But David R. Fuchs and Knuth just wrote the implementation. So Yakshave number 8, implement a custom language for printing the documents that you generate with the fonts and document description language which you invented. Note that I haven't actually mentioned that text is an interesting language by itself, but I don't consider that a Yakshave. That's just the implementation.
Yep.
And then last, we have community shaving is the best shaving. Since the release of text, the community has been busy working on it as a platform. If you ever download the full text distribution, please bear in mind that you're downloading the amassed work of over 40 years of effort to make sure that each and every text document ever written builds. We're talking about documents here, not source code.
Yeah.
But mostly, 2 big projects sprung out of this. The first is LaTeX by Leslie Lamport. Lamport is a very productive researcher, famous for research in formal methods through TLA+, and also known for laying the groundwork of many distributed algorithms. So LaTeX is based on the idea of separating the presentation and the content. It's based around the idea of document classes, which then describe a way a certain document is laid out. Think Markdown, but much more complex. The second derivative is context, which is far more focused on fine-grained layout control. But they both share a common property. Community Yakshave number 1, create not 1 but 2 programs that are very ungoogleable before Google is even invented. Being active in a language that has a lingo built around Rust, Cargo, and manifests, I feel right at home. Now, the community also evolved text. A lot has changed over the years in the technology. So, for example, you'd like to use modern font formats, directly write to modern output formats such as UTF-8. For that, there are specialized text interpreters such as PDF text and PDF LaTeX. Lua and Lua text and Ztext and Zlatex. Yeah. There's a problem here. You're not allowed to change text and distribute it under that name. The thing here is that if you have a text binary, you can compile any valid text from the past and from the future. The first issue on that road is that Web isn't a popular programming language, and neither is Pascal. And running it on a modern system is a bit of a pain, which means community yakshave number 2, transpile Web into C and work from there. And that's just the start of the endeavor. Community yakshave number 3, build a lot of tools around that.
Yeah.
So the moral of the story here is whenever you feel like, can't we just replace this whole thing? It can't be that hard when handling text. Don't forget how many years of work and especially knowledge were poured into this system. Typesetting isn't the most popular knowledge around programmers, especially see it in the context of the space it is in. Right? We can't remove legacy, ever. That would break people's documents. Text is also not a programming language. It just resembles one. But mostly, it should be approached as a typesetting system first. A lot of its confusing lingo gets much better once you understand. Right? If you know about typesetting, all of a sudden all the lingo makes sense. It's not programming lingo, it's typesetting. Yep. By approaching text with an understanding of its history, a lot of things can be learned from it. And yes, a replacement would be great, but it would take ages. It took us 40 years to get here. Even if we optimize a lot, it'd be like 20 years of effort to make something better.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, Lamport and Knut are certainly the giants in computer science.
Yes. So in any case, I hope I thoroughly convinced you that Donald Knuth is the patron saint of yakshaves.
Yep. Certainly there are developments been made that are still valid nowadays. I mean, in academic circles, you cannot, or you should definitely know and use LaTeX to write your thesis, or if you have any documents to write, academic ones, papers, this is certainly the way to go.
Yes, and they say, this game's out of an enjoyable discussion with Arne from Lambda Island, who listened to this story and said, you should totally turn this into a talk. And yes, I think more people should turn interesting stories into talks because I find those very entertaining.
Yeah, certainly. We tend to forget how these things came along and how they were developed. We just take them for granted. Yes. But there's a lot of things in the computing past that were just developed and we now have them still around because they work so well and were engineered that way.
Yep. So lastly, we have another recap of EuroBSDCon. So thank you to Vincent, who wrote up his adventures in Paris on his blog, and we can share them with you in hopes of convincing more of you to come to your first BSD conference.
Yes, that's our intent in this endeavor here. And certainly comparing these trip reports is also interesting because many people had similar experiences, but they also went to different talks than I did, so we get a whole bigger picture of the whole conference than just our own.
Yes, and I think also, I think one of the messages we've definitely got getting through to people is that lots of the people that are writing these trip reports that we're reading to you are not like super developers or anything, right? It's just a person who's has an interest in ABSD. Then you should totally come to a conference because that's how you get turned into one of these other people, right? Yeah. No one's born in isolation as a crazy BSD developer. You get turned into one by coming to one of these conferences.
And many people were there for their first BSD conference, and that's certainly encouraging to see that people are trying out these things and see what the community is like and have a good time at a conference.
Yes. The important thing is it is a good time, and you should come.
Yeah. So he writes, let me just share my feedback on those 2 days spent in Paris for EuroBSDCon. My first BSDCon. I'm not a developer, contributor, or whatever. Do not expect to improve your skills with OpenBSD with this text. I know we are on October 16th, and the EuroBSDCon of Paris was 3 weeks ago. I'm not that quick. That's okay.
We're not going to complain about it. We're reading this on November 29th.
It's November. Yeah, but it's still valid. So arrival at 10 a.m. I'm too late for the start of the keynote. The few persons behind the desk welcome me by talking in Dutch, maybe because of my name. Indeed, Delft is a city in the Netherlands, but also as well a well-known university there. I informed them that I'm from Belgium, and the discussion moves to the fact that the FOSDEM is located in Brussels. Yes, actually, that's in February, the first weekend. I received my nice t-shirt, white and blue, a bit like the Marine t-shirts, but with a nice EuroBSD con logo. I'm asking where are the different rooms reserved for the BSD event. We have one big room on the first floor, one medium, and one on the lower level, and two small on the level 1 above. All are very easy and really quickly to reach, actually. In this entrance, we have 4 or 5 tables with some persons representing the company. Those are mainly the big sponsors of the event, providing details about their activities and business. I discuss a little bit with Storm Shield and Gandhi, and on other tables, people are selling BSD t-shirts, and they will quickly be sold.
Yes, that was the Run BSD t-shirts. Most of those were pre-arranged. You ordered it ahead of time and just picked it up at the conference, but they did print some extras to sell, but they quickly ran out because I think Benedict wanted one and he didn't get one.
I tried to get one at the conference, but I'm closer to the source because I could just
They
ship
might arrange for them at FOSDEM, so
certainly, yeah.
And we'll try to promote that for people.
Yeah. One more t-shirt from my collection. That's certainly a good thing to have, Run BSD. So next headline is, well, in this blog post at least, is it done yet? The never-ending story of package tools. So in the last FOSDEM, I've already heard Antoine and Baptiste presenting the OpenBSD and FreeBSD battle. So he decided to listen to Mark SB in the medium room called Karnak. Mark explains that he was rewriting completely the package_add command. He explains that, at contrary to what other elements in OpenBSD are, the package tools must be backward compatible and stable on a longer period than just 12 months, which is the support period for OpenBSD. On the funny side, he explains that he has his best idea inside his bath. Hackathons are also used to validate some ideas with other OpenBSD developers, and all in all, he explains that the most time-consuming part is to imagine a good solution. Coding is quite straightforward. He adds that the better an idea is, the shorter the implementation will be. Yeah, because then you just have to put it into code and you already have all the discussions done and figure out the proper way to do this. So, a tale of 6 motherboards, 3 BSDs, and core boot. After the lunch, I decide to listen...
you skipped lunch.
Oh, I skipped something, sorry. Lunch is important. Did I?
He says, this is when they had a pause for lunch. Every participant received a bag with 2 small sandwiches, some pasta, and a cake. As you can imagine, all possible seats are already used. Eating in the conference rooms is forbidden, so I decided to sit on the stairs and eat my meal. Close to me on the stairs sat Mr. Kirk McCusick, Mr. UFS himself. Finally, after a few minutes, the stairs are full of people eating their lunch bags. This is a bit improvised, but the good thing is that they can meet and discuss easily with various people. So I went all the way up the stairs and found some benches in a corner somewhere and sat with a bunch of other people. And I think I was actually looking at a problem somebody was having with their NVMe device on FreeBSD while I was trying to eat.
Yeah. There was a lot of good things during lunch, and people can, mingle better than just in the 15-minute lunch or coffee breaks.
Yep.
Okay, going on with the tale of 6 motherboards, 3 BSDs, and a core boot. So after the lunch, he decided to listen to the talk about core boot. Indeed, 1 or 2 years ago, he had listened to the LibreBoot project at FOSDEM. Since they did several references to core boot, it's a perfect occasion to listen more carefully to this project. Piotr and Katajba, sorry, I don't know how to pronounce that, explained to us how to boot a machine without the native BIOS. Indeed, core boot can replace the BIOS and de facto avoid several binaries imposed by the vendor. So yeah, this has been coming up recently with the Intel Management Engine stuff.
Well, the management engine is actually separate from the BIOS.
True, but similar things could be explained, or exchanged. So they explained that some motherboards are supporting their code, and they also have shown how difficult it is to flash a BIOS and replace it by core boot. They even have destroyed a motherboard during the installation. That can happen, and that could be expensive. Apparently, because the power supply they were using was not stable enough within the 3 volts region. Ooh, if that's the problem, then that's bad. It's really amazing to see that open source developers can go by themselves to such deep technical level. So next up is state of the Dragonfly's graphics stack. So after this core boot talk, I decided to stay in the room to follow the presentation of François Tujot. François is now one of the core developers of Dragonfly BSD, an amazing BSD system having his own file system called Hammer. Hammer offers several amazing features like snapshots, checksum data integrity, deduplication, and more. François has spent his last years to integrate the video drivers developed to Linux into Dragonfly. He explains that instead of adapting the code for the video card to the kernel API of Dragonfly BSD, he has simply built an intermediate layer between the kernel of Dragonfly and the video drivers. This is not said in the talk, but this effort is very impressive. Indeed, this is more or less a Linux emulator inside Dragonfly BSD. François explains that he has started with Intel video driver, the DRM i915, but now he's able to run DRM Radeon quite well, but also DRM AMD GPU and DRM Nouveau. After his presentation, this is a good moment to have a break, take some coffee, water, or orange juice. Okay, discovering OpenBSD on AWS.
Yep, so they did, he also provides notes on the talk about OpenBSD on AWS, another one on the infrastructure behind bloom.genoa.de. He set up a lab where he's run different OpenBSD architectures and how that works. And then one of the closing keynotes was a story about the French story of cybercrime. This is the second keynote of the day in the big auditorium. This talk is performed by a colonel of the French gendarmerie, and he works in the cybercrime unit. He explains that the bad guys are more and more volatile across countries and more organized. A small hacker in his room alone is not as much a concern anymore. As a consequence, the different national police investigators are collaborating more inside of Interpol. What is amazing in his talk is that he talks about crime as a service. Indeed, more and more hackers are selling their services to some bad and temporary organizations. Without giving any names, he explains us that several complex criminal organizations are identified and how the involved persons are actually arrested and jailed.
Yeah, I remember that story or that keynote. That was a good one because it gave us a little bit more insight of how the law enforcement side of the whole cybercrime is working.
Yep.
Or what they're dealing with, actually.
Yep, and then he's got some notes about the social event. He says, now time for the famous social event on the river, La Seine. Organizers asked us to go in small groups to the subway station. There's a walk of 15 minutes inside Paris. Hopefully the weather is perfect. To identify them clearly, several BSD organizers had the trident and the pitchfork type things attached to their backpacks or whatever, so it was easy to follow the group. And we walked on the sidewalk, generating some amazing reactions from the regular citizens and general tourists. Some of them even recognized the FreeBSD logo and asked us about it. That was amazing. He says, we walk on small and big sidewalks until a small stair goes under the street. There, they take a train for a bit, and then 3 stations later, they get off and walk a few minutes, and we're sitting in front of a boat that has 2 decks. One inside with nice tables and chairs, and then one on the roof. But the crew asked us to go up to the second deck on the roof. There, they will welcome us with glasses of wine and other drinks. The Eiffel Tower is just about 100 meters away from where we are, and every hour the Eiffel Tower blinks in an array of fancy lights for about 5 minutes. It's quite interesting. And the weather is still very good, and some of us remain on the second deck where we have a nice view of Paris, and I liked it, the kind of cacophony of noise from so many people and so many conversations kind of escapes into the air a bit, and it was easier to hear people, whereas inside it could get a bit loud and hard for me to hear the person I was talking to. But it was good.
Yep.
Some bridges were not so high, and you could almost reach up and touch them as we passed under them. We also saw the Statue of Liberty, the small one, which is on a small island in the middle of the river. During the whole night, the bar was open with drinks and appetizers and snacks. Such walking dinner is perfect to talk to lots of different people. Yes, that's definitely what I liked about it, was rather than some of the other dinners where we had been seated at a table and you were with a couple of people, and those were very good and I had a lot of fun, but getting to talk to a lot of different people was better.
Yeah, to get a whole bigger idea of the conference and the attendees.
Yeah, and just, especially there are 300 people at this conference and I know quite a few of them, but it'd be great if I could actually talk to some reasonable subset of them.
Yeah.
He says he discussed with several people just using BSD and, even if and how some of them were like him, not deep, sophisticated developers. One was from Switzerland and another one from Austria and another from the Netherlands. But I've also followed a discussion with Theo de Rat, several people from the FreeBSD Foundation, and a bunch of other people. Some are very technical guys and some are just users like him. But all of these have the same passion for the BSD systems, and it was an amazing evening. And then finally, at 0030, we arrived back where we had left from and headed back to our hotels. He says the travel back was not so well organized. In fact, several people have taken trains, metros, and otherwise gone directly back to their hotel. Groups were much smaller and less organized. He was in a group of just 3 people willing to go back near the conference building, and we finally got back to their hotels around 1 in the morning.
Well, it's been a long night, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And people made that even longer by going to a restaurant after that.
Yeah, I didn't do that.
Yeah.
Then he's got coverage of the second day, where he looks at OpenBSD's small steps towards having something like dtrace, the OpenBSD web stack by Michael Lucas, OpenSMTPD, state of affairs on the mail server, and then Theo's talk, hoisting the lessons learned from integrating Pledge into 500 applications, and some other general talk about the security initiatives in OpenBSD. And he says, shame on me, it's 4:30 in the afternoon and I leave without following the closing keynote. I have to ride 3 hours and it's, didn't get much sleep the previous night, as you can imagine. And so he wants to get home before it gets too dark.
Yeah, that's it's desirable. But yeah, overall, this is a nice experience.
He says, my first EuroBSDCon was a great, interesting, and cool event. I've discussed with several BSD enthusiasts. I've been using OpenBSD since about 2010, but I'm not a developer, so I was worried that I'd be lost in the middle of the experts. In fact, that was not the case. At EuroBSDCon, you have many different types of enthusiasts. What is nice with EuroBSDCon is that the organizers foresee everything for you. You just have to sit and listen. They foresee even how to spend in a funny and very cool attitude the evening on Saturday. He says the small drawback was the cost. In this case, the whole weekend cost about 500 euros. Based on what I've learned, I'd say it was a very acceptable price. Nearly all presentations I saw gave me valuable input on my day job. For sure, the total price is also linked to personal choice of hotel and parking and things like that. And I'm surely biased because I'm used to, FOSDEM in Brussels, which doesn't cost anything to get in and is only 45 minutes from home. But, FOSDEM is not the same atmosphere, and the presentations are a lot less directed to what I use in my day job. He says, I definitely don't regret my trip to EuroBSDCon and will surely plan another.
Yeah, this is...
Plus, I'm sure, the 2018 EuroBSDCon will probably be quite a bit less expensive for a hotel because it won't be in Paris.
Yeah, it's moving to a different country each year, and people can pick up a cheaper option there. And make sure to say hi to us at FOSDEM next year in February. We'll be there in the BSD Dev Room, and I'm not sure whether we have a table yet there because we haven't got a reply back, but if we do, you can certainly find us at least.
We should definitely follow up and make sure that happens. So.
Yeah, they just need to get back to us. Or take the BSDA exam. This has also been offered there. So, yeah, we'll see each other at FOSDEM. Just say hi.
Yeah. And like you said, don't worry if you're not a developer. We want more than just developers to come to the conference because, the developers are not hard to talk to. They're just regular people like me, right? Yeah. You just walk up to them and talk to them. And they're very interested in knowing what people that use this stuff every day for their day job actually need. Which features do you find useful and what things do you find that are missing? The only way for those features to get written is either you write them or you come to the conference and tell us about it.
Easy enough.
Yeah.
So after this conference report and other news items, we should jump right into our Beastie Bits this week, starting with important munitions lawyering.
Yes, so this one's an interesting discussion about the GPL. I think it's Michael Garrity or something. I forget. Matthew Garrity. MGG, not from FreeBSD, but the one from Linux, asks, if a smart weapon running Linux fails to explode, is the target entitled to the GPL source code?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Some interesting responses is yes, but if it's lesser GPL, then they can make the bomb itself proprietary. Ethical warmongers release their weapons under Creative Commons 0. And another response is, a missile is technically a deployment and not just a distribution. So I guess the rules would be interesting for the AGPL, the Faro GPL as well. Another response, the weapon must include the written offer to distribute the corresponding source. It doesn't matter if the recipient actually runs the software. But what if the target is under trade embargoes and the sender can't actually fulfill the offer of the source code? Do they still have a license? Another replies, I worked as a consultant on the Iron Dome missile defense system. It shoots Linux running missiles designed to intercept incoming missiles. We debated many questions. If the target is another missile, who are you distributing to? The other missile? Does the missile have rights? Would it, including the source code on the missile, be enough to satisfy the GPL?
Well, I think you have other problems if that happens. But
yes,
yeah.
And they also, if you target civilians, is it a user product under the GPL v3? And anything designated to be sold into incorporation into a dwelling?
This is just an atrocity. You don't target civilians with nukes.
We didn't say nukes, just missiles, regular missiles.
But
conventional missiles. Other responses include, I'm reminded of the guidance computer that leaked memory about as fast as the rocket fuel was used. And so they didn't bother fixing the memory leak because before it ran out of memory, it ran out of fuel, and so it already missed, so it doesn't matter.
Okay.
And those jokes about loops and ADA having detonation as a terminal condition sends the Haskellers mental.
Yeah.
And then C++ calls this kind of loop undefined behavior. Another response is, it depends. Would it be legal trade in the first place? Pretty sure if the target is a state sponsor of terror, then you can't have a contract with them in the first place. Later it says, yes, but reasonable cost for the media must be levied. So including the source code on the warhead, then charge for the entire price of the missile. Right? Because the GPL includes an exception for, if you ship if someone requests the source code, you can charge them for the CD you ship it to them on and for the postage. And so if they include the source code on the explosive device, then they could say, you can have the source code, but you have to pay for the whole device.
Oh, yeah.
And another question is, does this count as malware?
Yeah, well...
Yes, and then generalized, the question becomes, if any device is used on you, do you become a user of the device? So then this raises the question, are you entitled to the source code for, say, the airport scanner that scans you? You know, technically the user might be the TSA or whatever, but if it's being used on you, do you become a user?
Yeah.
Anyway, interesting questions that not liberal licenses can bring out.
This discussion reminded me of the Voyager episode Warhead, where this, Warhead becomes sentient by taking over the doctor and, wants to definitely destroy his target, but there's some discussion going back and forth whether the target's still valid and all these things. It's a nice episode. So read through this and make your own mind about nukes and munitions lawyering.
And we also have a reminder, Asia BSD Con, our favorite conference that happens in Tokyo, will be March 8th through 11th in 2018. It is a conference for anyone developing, deploying, or using systems based on FreeBSD, NetBSD, OpenBSD, Dragonfly, Darwin, or Mac OS X. Asia BSD Con is a technical conference and aims to collect the best technical papers and presentations available to ensure that the latest developments in our open source community are shared with the widest possible audience. The call for papers is open and will close December 15th, so hurry up and write your proposal and get it sent in.
Have you been on the program committee before?
No, this is new.
Oh, congratulations.
Yes, thank you.
It's a couple of new people, or did they just edit you?
Yes, the idea is to try to lighten the load for the other people on the program committee.
Okay, makes sense. Oh yeah, so definitely go to Asia BSD Con. It's so worth it. I enjoyed it very much each time I was there, and that's what got me hooked, and I'm going next year as well.
Yes, and so accepting both tutorial proposals and paper proposals. So whether you want to give a talk or just a tutorial, then you should submit those and get them in, and we will make it happen. And, if you have an accepted tutorial or paper, then the conference also helps with getting you to Tokyo and housing you while you're in Tokyo.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an added bonus for you to submit something.
And, who wouldn't want to visit Tokyo? It's amazing. Plus, you get to do it with a bunch of other amazing people.
Yeah, so the amazingness in one place.
Yes. I've started going earlier and earlier every year to make my trip to Tokyo longer.
Oh, you too? Okay, we should talk offline.
Yes. I think I was looking at Thursday or Friday.
Thursday.
Leaving home the Thursday before, so arriving on the 1st or something. Is it?
Okay. I arrived on
so leaving home March 1st was quite a bit cheaper than going on the Friday or the Saturday or the Sunday after that.
Okay. Oh, well. That's
so just when you go to the airline, you check that little "my dates are flexible" and it gives you a grid, and you just find the cheapest day to go.
Yeah, I know. I was aware of the dates a little bit earlier than the official website, so I booked earlier. So, but yeah, I have a couple of days before the official conference starts, and then spend my time there. All right.
But anyway, reminder so that people can't claim it snuck up on them. The call for papers is open. You only have a little over 2 weeks to get your proposal in. And then January 5th, they'll notify the people that are accepted, and you'll have some time to finish up your paper and get it in.
Yep, I will nag a couple of people who I want to see there at their talks. So, yeah. Okay, our next story is a Z standard compression for ZFS by a certain Alan Jude. It's a YouTube video. So what's that about?
So this is the video from the OpenZFS conference.
Very good. Something to watch for me.
So if you go to openZFS.org and click on the Dev Summit, they have the videos of all the talks.
Excellent. Even more for me to watch.
But yes, so my talk is about 19 minutes in there. And you can see I'm comparing the compression levels of the different levels of Z standard and how much changing they have.
Mm-hmm. Very good. I will certainly make sure to watch that. And our last item this week is NetBSD on the All-Winner System on Chips update over at the NetBSD blog. And this is from Jared McNeil. He writes, since the last update, they've made a number of improvements to the NetBSD All-Winner port. The Sun XI kernel has grown support for 8 new System on Chips, and we added many new device drivers to the source repository. So a couple of systems here are listed with these, the A10, the A13, the A20, A31, A64, A80, A83T, GR8, H2+, A3, H5, and R8. And you can find an up-to-date list of supported stocks with example boards that are maintained by the NetBSD on the All-Winner wiki page. So they've added a bunch of drivers to that to make it work better in the following areas. So there's audio codec support now, and there's also Ethernet supported on all applicable All-Winner System on Chips. 3 Ethernet drivers are available: fast gigabit Ethernet, gigabit Ethernet, and gigabit Ethernet, as found in different device families that are listed above. Frame buffers available, thermal sensors, CPU frequency and voltage scaling, as well as touchscreen and some other devices like GPIO, I2C, interrupt controllers. So all things that come together to make it work and be usable to the user, actually. So what is missing? The Wi-Fi and SDIO especially. There's a lot of different wireless chips out there used in these boards, but the majority seem either Broadcom or Realtek based, and they ported the OpenBSD's BWFM driver to support the USB version of the Broadcom Wi-Fi controllers, with an expectation that the SDI support will follow at some point in the future. And NAND controllers are also not quite there yet. Most of these boards have eMMC and or micro SD card slots, but this would be really useful for the chip-to-chip Pro Pocket Chip family of devices to make those work with NAND controllers. And 64-bit support for the Sun 50i family system of chips would also be nice to have. They're working on that as well. And also there are some readily available install images for people who own such devices and want to try it out. And there's also a prototype NetBSD ARM bootable image webpage to see how that is being done and to offer a limited selection of supported boards.
Yes, I have the generic ARM image that works on the Raspberry Pi 2 and 3, and the NVIDIA Tegra K1 and X1, but also some Zulong Orange Pis, the Pinebook, the Pine 64, Hummingbird, and the NanoPi.
Okay, very nice. So NetBSD folks should try those out, and maybe the drivers are portable to other operating systems in the BSD family, so there's a lot of sharing going on maybe. So this might be something other BSD projects should look into. Okay, before we go into our feedback and questions section for this week, we should look at our sponsor for that specific section, which is, of course, Tarsnap, the online paranoid backups for people that are actually truly paranoid.
Yes, online paranoia for people who are backed up. I mean,
as a service.
Yes.
So, what do we get from Tarsnap?
It's the only backup service where you get the source code for the client so that you can ensure that no unencrypted data leaks out of your machine and to the backup provider. And this ensures that you don't have to trust the backup server. You maybe you decide you can trust Colin and Tarsnap, but the important part is you don't need to, because the way it is designed, even if he's malicious or controlled by the government, and even if Amazon is taken over by the government, again, everything's encrypted on your machine, and only the encrypted, or the already segmented, deduplicated, compressed, and then encrypted and signed blocks go out to the cloud. So as long as you control access to the key and don't leak it, no one can ever read the data. And when you destroy the key, it means that data is unrecoverable, and that's the only way you can ensure data in the cloud actually gets deleted. Because, the cloud's all replicated and backed up and whatever, even if you mark it as deleted, it probably won't be. There is stories about Dropbox, where people had files they deleted years ago magically just pop back up into their thing because they're only marked as deleted, not actually deleted. And one little database mistake, and oh, look, your data is still there. It's like, well, I thought I safely erased that. It's like, no, it's the cloud. The only way to safely erase something is it was always encrypted in the cloud, and I'm destroying the key now.
Yep.
So head over to tarsnap.com/BSD Now. Check it out. Only takes $5 to get started. Low risk. And it's pay as you go, so you can never have a surprise bill because you can only use up to what you've already put in.
Yeah, and you can pay via PayPal or a credit card connected to that, and also using Stripe. And
yes, with Stripe, you can even pay with Bitcoins if you want.
Yeah, so all these new currency coins out there that are gaining value over the weeks.
Not all of them, just Bitcoin.
A couple of them, yeah. So this might be something you can pay for your backup services.
Yes, if you want to be anonymous with your backups, then you can do that as well.
Yeah. Cool. So thanks for that sponsoring. And our first question for this week comes from Tim about creating multi-boot USB sticks. He writes, "Hi guys, are you aware of any BSD compatible apps for creating multi-boot USB sticks, similar to Yumi, the USB multi-boot creator? Here's a link to its webpage, in case you've never heard of it." Actually, I haven't heard about that. So it's a USB multi-boot creator, which you can use in many different systems. Yeah, okay, so he further writes, "I know there are plenty of online tutorials which contain the steps for getting a USB stick to boot FreeBSD, OpenBSD, or others, usually to be used as installation media, but this is limited to one OS per memory stick. Yumi allows you to have multiple OSs on the stick, either for installation media or a live system like Freebsd, Knoppix, or others. I searched online and checked the FreeBSD ports tree, but I couldn't find anything. Thanks, Tim."
Because Grub can start FreeBSD, I'm guessing it wouldn't be much work to add FreeBSD to something like Yumi. But for building something like that on FreeBSD, I don't know. For something more static, the Thomas Soom, the Illumos developer who came over to FreeBSD with part of his work to port the FreeBSD bootloader to Illumos, added chain loading support. So the FreeBSD loader can chain load another operating system or another bootloader. So it is possible to create a FreeBSD USB stick where the loader menu can boot other operating systems on other partitions on the disk. But you'd have to, define them manually or whatever. There's no dynamic discovery. So if you just wanted to build a one-off USB stick that had 4 OSs on it, you could do it. But if you want something like Yumi, where it's going to, just detect whatever you put on the USB stick and dynamically make the menu, then you're probably best off just adding FreeBSD to Yumi, or something like syslinux, which has a similar setup.
Okay.
Something I saw recently was netboot.xyz, which is a website that has you pixie boot this URL, and it has a menu system that allows you to choose to boot a FreeBSD installer or various flavors of Linux and so on. And I'm guessing you could make a not netboot version of that as well, and all of that's on GitHub as well. But yes, it'd be interesting to see somebody build something like that using the chain loader support in FreeBSD's loader, but I generally don't have much use for installing things other than FreeBSD. And if I was going to build something to install multiple versions of FreeBSD or something, I wouldn't have to do that in the bootloader. I could just do that in the installer.
Directly, yeah, without any other... Okay. Let's hope that answers your question. The next one is from Noman. Sorry. ZFS question. Here we go. You asked for ZFS questions, and I needed some advice, so here it goes. So he has a NAS with 4 GB RAM, D270, CPU. Yeah, and 2 times 2 terabyte HDDs in a mirror with ZFS. Now he wants to do some performance testing with encryption using Galley. What steps do I have to take to start testing with one of the disks? And what do I need to do to mirror them, whether successful or not? And he provides a couple of steps he would take. So from the looks of that...
So he's thinking offline disk 2 from the pool, clean the GPT and ZFS data, create a new GPT, encrypt it with Galley, create a new pool, add the disk to the new pool, then test. Do I need to run?
Oh, to make sure that...
Depending how you want to do it, you could do it without creating a new pool at all. If you offline or detach disk 2 from your pool, basically recreate it as Galley, then you can replace the offline disk or attach it, if you detached, to the existing pool, and it will resilver all the data from the unencrypted disk to the encrypted disk. And now you have a pool with one regular disk and one encrypted disk. You could then offline the not encrypted disk, do your performance test, and then online switch them back and forth basically until you have done your benchmarks on both sides and are happy. And then if you want to convert the other one, you offline disk 1, recreate it as Galley, replace it into the pool, let it resilver, and you're done. Or you offline disk 2, throw out the Galley, create the regular partitions again, and let it resilver again as not encrypted. So you don't need to create a new pool. The only time where you might want the new pool is if you want to run the 2 of them non-redundantly at the same time to do your benchmarks or whatever, but that might be a bit confusing and it's slightly higher risk.
Yeah, so straightforward, actually.
Yeah, so offline disk 2, recreate it as Galley to replace the offline disk with the new Galley disk, let it resilver, and now you have one of each, and you can offline the not encrypted disk and do your benchmarks. So I guess best way to do offline disk 2, do some benchmarks. Then now you have your baseline of how it works with one not encrypted disk. Then replace the disk with the Galley version, let it do the Z-pool replace, let it resilver, offline the not encrypted disk, do your benchmarks again. Now you have a comparison. Then either reformat the offline disk as Galley and bring it back up, or bring the unencrypted disk back online with just Z-pool online. Once it's caught up, then you can offline the encrypted disk, blow it away, and re-online it as, or replace it as the non-encrypted version, and it will resilver all your data back, and you'll be back to a not encrypted pool. Other thing is your benchmarking is difficult, especially on ZFS because of the caching and so on. And finding ways to work around the cache in places and making sure your results are repeatable can be very complicated. In general, if you just want a quick basic idea of how fast the Galley is, create a memory disk, so mdconfig, well, you don't have very much memory, so I guess a small one. Galley encrypt it, and then read and write to it a couple times and see what the speeds are like when just reading and writing to memory, and see how much of a bottleneck the encryption is. And if it's too much, then you decide not to do it. And if it's not, that's not. That particular CPU, I don't know if it supports AES-NI. If you don't have the AES-NI crypto offload instruction, I would recommend against Galley because doing it on the CPU is just too slow.
Yep.
Also, before doing any of this, I'd make sure I have a good backup of all those because there's a, if one of those disks has a hiccup during the swapping procedure you're doing, you could lose everything. Right. If you've erased all the data on the second disk and set it up as encrypted, and then the first disk starts having errors, then you don't have a good copy of the file.
Yeah, so the pool should be empty and nothing on it while doing the tests. Okay.
Next question.
All right. Yeah. The next one is from JJ. He has a couple of questions. So he writes, thanks, guys, for a great show. After Chris Fisher dissed FreeBSD so much, I just had to try it out. Dual booting with elementary OS. So that's how it works. I used cooltrainer.org to bootstrap with Get Her on the Show as a hint for us. Okay, we'll try that. Rather than TrueOS due to old and low memory ThinkPad T400 with UFS. I run into a few noob issues. So the first one is NTFS 3G versus Mount-T NTFS. For thumb drives, the latter works, but USB HD, I had to use the former. Why would a direct mount behave different than the fuse mount?
I think just the NTFS driver in FreeBSD is quite old. And in fact, I think in newer versions, it's not even there anymore. And it probably just couldn't handle the larger volume.
Yeah, that's probably it.
But I'd say the NTFS 3G is definitely the one to go with on FreeBSD.
Yeah, because the port has a bunch more updates. The second question is, it took quite a few times to figure out my ISP DNS was not unbound compatible and to use local _unbound _ forwarders in rc.conf. So,
I'm guessing it's DNSSEC or something that it's not compatible. Like, I don't know how an ISP's DNS could be incompatible. I don't know that much about that one. Sorry.
Yeah, so he's thinking whether the installer did not detect the ISP DNS correctly, or the local unbound forwarder seemed to only inject
the installer doesn't set up unbound by default. So if you had an unbound problem, that's something you did outside the installer.
Afterwards. Well, it might be worth asking the ISP about that, because they should know. Otherwise, any suggestions to inject an IPv6 DNS address for that?
I don't know. I don't use unbound very much. To indicate that it's a v6 address, sometimes you have to put it in square brackets. But
yep. Yeah, maybe someone.
Probably the man page for unbound is probably the best place to look for that.
Yeah.
Although the answer might also be in the startup script that reads that variable, which would be etc/rc.d/unbound, or local _unbound, I guess. Which you might be able to see how it's processing that variable, if it's expecting it to be just one, or if it's expecting a list.
Okay. Yeah, maybe that helps. Or ask your ISP what the issue might be. Maybe they have an idea.
But thanks for the feedback.
Yeah.
And hopefully you're having fun with FreeBSD.
Oh yeah, don't get discouraged by those drawbacks, whatever they might be. Last question for this week is hardening Diffie-Hellman. So from Lars here, he writes, great show. Over at Mastodon, Peter Hessler posted about generating his own moduli file for DH. It looks interesting, but can you guys explain the problem this might solve and the pros and cons of this approach? So he posted that as a quote to see what it's about. So apparently, to improve the security of his servers, he's generating his own moduli file. Having a different one from others makes certain pre-computed attacks more difficult. So this creates a bunch of random numbers, I think, for the SSH.
Well, I think they're moduli, so they're the things you're calculating the remainder from the primes. So the way Diffie-Hellman works is that, so me and Benedict say, are two people, and we want to be able to communicate in secret. But we haven't come up with a password before. So right now, Benedict and I would like to come up with a password. But as we're talking right now, lots of other people are listening.
Yeah.
So if I just told them I'm going to encrypt the message with this password, everybody would know the password and be able to decrypt the message.
Yeah,
so instead,
help there.
One of us comes up with, or each of us, we come up with some random numbers, and then I think I come up with 2 random numbers and take the first one to the power of the second one, and then send that to Benedict, and he raises it to the power of his random number, and uses that to generate a key. Anyway, you don't want me to explain Diffie-Hellman off the top of my head.
The crypto, yeah.
But it's an algorithm that allows us, by exchanging random numbers open in the public in front of you guys, to come up with a key, a password for encryption that somebody who listened to the 2 numbers we came up with, that we communicated to each other, wouldn't be able to guess the password. Or to figure out the key, they would have to be able to do derivation, which is the most complex bit of math that computers are bad at. So they'd have to try random guessing, basically brute force, to figure out the password. So the moduli are used in there to make the numbers smaller a bit, because they're like, giant primes to the power of another giant prime makes huge numbers. Anyway, so yes, having a different moduli file than other people means that
standard attack won't target that machine. The numbers are different.
It's less likely that you're going to be using the same number as everybody else, and that same number is the attacker's going to have already pre-computed a table to try to make the job of guessing simpler.
Well, the drawbacks of that approach will creating these moduli, as he writes, will take several days. And if you don't have the time, then you have to use weaker numbers or the standard ones. But yeah, it's an idea that actually works, because you're just exchanging these numbers with other numbers and create those SSH keys out of that.
Yeah, so if you want to burn a couple of days of CPU times doing it, then you will be more secure. But there's no known insecurity right now. So up to you to decide how you want to do it.
Yeah, but thanks for letting us know about this. Maybe some people want to try this out instead of running Bitcoin mining for weeks and spending their CPU cycles there. This is the end of our show for this week. Thanks for listening. And send us questions, comments, show ideas, topics you might find on the internet, and send it to feedback@bsdnow.tv so we could cover it in a future episode.